Welcome back. Well, I thought that since I'm still working a bit on the RCA's cabinet for the moment and work isn't progressing as quickly as I had hoped, I would take a break again from the RCA and make a one episode, or at the most a 2 episode restoration of something completely different for my and of course your enjoyment. And this will be the next project. In fact, I was lucky to find a service manual of it, and in fact what we're going to restore tonight is this. It's a Sony TR-1829C portable AM radio. Okay, so broadcast only. And in fact, it's that radio over there. Okay, so that's the one we're going to try to repair and if possible, of course, try to restore it to its original look if we can within the allotted time. So well, let's jump right into it. So first of all, of course, what I need to do is to open up the radio, and they have a very small paragraph here which explains just that. It says dismantling of the radio. One moment, I'll take my pointer and use that instead of my fat finger to show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so dismantling, right here, this paragraph. Okay, so what it says in the first paragraph right here is main cabinet removal, and they say remove bottom of cabinet by rotating anti-clockwise. So they probably mean this part here. In fact, the part where the speaker is housed. And if I'm not mistaken, there is also the type number on this part. Let's see. Yeah, here it is. So here it says TR-2829, although the 9 isn't very clear. It's a bit dirty, but I guess this is it. Let me see with my magnifying glass. Yes, it is a 9. Okay, so they say I need to remove the bottom part of the cabinet by rotating it anti-clockwise. So let's just do that. So oh yeah, it does rotate. And okay, I can lift out. Ah, okay. And this is a battery holder. With corroded contacts, obviously. I've rarely seen a portable radio without corroded battery contacts. That seems to be a given for radios like this. Okay, so what do they say next? Hang on. Okay. They say so clockwise. Now unsolder the red and black leads at battery terminals, 2 wide leads at the speaker, and take 2 leads out of the battery case. Remove 3 screws and pull out assembly. Right, so what they say, or what they seem to say or suggest, is, let me put away my laptop for a moment. Right, what they seem to suggest is that I should unmount two white wires from the case of from the lower part of the case, but I don't see two white wires. In fact, if I look carefully, I only see one wire, white wire that is, not two. Okay, and then they say I need to remove screws from inside the case. Oh dear. And I think you can see what I see, namely that the screws are corroded, badly corroded in fact, with battery acid. Strange. I mean, the only way those screws can be corroded, if the battery holder is like this, is that the acid must have run down on them. Now, as far as I can tell, gravity doesn't work in a reverse way. So if the radio stood like this, the way it should stand, then I can't imagine battery acid running up to those screws. So apparently somebody must have left the radio upside down, and the battery acid must have run down into it. Okay, interesting. Well, the next step is clear. I need to undo those corroded screws to get at the internals of the radio. So let me just try that. Screws that were holding down the housing, which you see here, to the main chassis, let's say, were rusted shut. And I mean really completely rusted. And I tried several methods to try to release it from the chassis, and no matter what method I used, it simply didn't seem to work. Yeah, because, well, the screws are pretty much rusted shut. So what I decided to do was actually to use a rather blunt method, or very rough method, which is to heat up the screws, which you see here, by grinding them with a small axle grinder like this. Okay, so I heated up the screws very locally on top of them, and when they were pretty hot, I just pushed them through the opening, head and all. Now, okay, that means that the holes are a little bit damaged, as you can tell for yourselves. But I think I can repair that without too much trouble. And in any case, would I have tried any other method to release them, it would have cost me an enormous amount of time, and I would probably in the end have made more damage than good. So anyway, now I released the chassis from the housing, yeah, and well, it doesn't look very clean or whatever. In fact, I would say it looks rather messy. My guess is probably somebody worked on it in the past, and probably even tried to put it back together again, and did a pretty lousy job of it. And in fact, I can tell already immediately that the high frequency coil, you know, the antenna coil, is not connected. You know, there's a wire floating here. Well, although maybe it is. Still, it looks very, very unstable. So, what is the next step? Well, now that I finally released the chassis from the housing, I will disconnect the wires that go to the battery compartment and the speaker, and then I'll start by cleaning it all up, so that at least I have a good idea of what I'm working on, yeah, and maybe I can assess a bit of the damage, if any, and possibly even identify parts that need to be replaced. Well, okay, I released the screws, and they are here. Okay, so I resorted to the same solution, which is to heat up the screws from above with the grinder, and then when they are just about hot enough, they would start to melt the legs in which they were screwed, you know. I gripped them tightly by the head with a plier, and then started to turn and pull them up. And by doing that, gradually I managed to release all 3 screws. Now, while I was doing that, the volume button released of its own. I guess it did that because of the vibrations of the grinding. And lucky me, the screw that holds down the volume button was still in it. It's loose, but I still have it, which is a great thing, actually. Okay, so that's one thing done. Now I need to release the top cap, meaning this, the dial button actually. And to do that, I need to release a screw which is inside this slit. Now, I don't know if I can show you the screw, but let's give it a try. There. I think maybe you are able to see it. Just about. Let's see now. It's hard to see for myself where the screw is. I think you can just about see the screw. There. Okay? So I need to release that screw to release the dial head. So let's just do that. The dial button, or the dial cap, is released from the tuning capacitor, and well, you can tell it's pretty dirty. So, you know, my guess is it must have been exposed to a lot of harsh, to a very harsh environment, or at least a very dirty one. So, okay, I released the dial cap, and this is how it looks like from the top. You know, there's a tuning cap right here, and if I touch the axle, okay, well, you can tell it's quite loose. Okay, so I'll need to fix that. Now, strangely enough, the tuning capacitor is mounted on a sort of a spring-like contraption, you see, and it has a little bit of give. It's almost like a speaker spring, you could say. And, you know, my guess is they did that to reduce any kind of vibration on the tuning capacitor. Otherwise, well, I don't really see any other use for this kind of, let's say, mechanism. Anyway, what I need to do now is I need to release the battery holder and the speaker from the wiring loom that goes to the main chassis. You know, those three wires, the red, black and white. Obviously, the grounding is common to the battery and the speaker. Now, the speaker, well, as you know, the bottom cap of the radio is a sort of a screw click on type. So you just insert it and give it a short twist, I think clockwise. Now, the speaker is mounted itself inside the bottom cap assembly. And after having studied it a bit closer, I noticed that the speaker is actually mounted in a screw cap, pretty much like the bottom cap, which fits inside the bottom cap. Now, technically speaking, I should be able to just simply twist and pull it out. But what did they do? And I guess they did that at the factory. They melted one of the sliders, as you can tell right here, which of course would lock the inner ring into the outer ring rather permanently. So what I need to do now is to sort of, well, either unmelt this or cut it with a very sharp utility knife, and hopefully I can slide it out that way. So let's give it a try. Well, and here is the whole inventory of all the parts of the radio. So we have the speaker enclosure right here, and as you can tell, I managed to release the battery holder compartment from the speaker compartment by the simple expedient of cutting through that burn mark with a very sharp little utility knife. And you can see there I cut straight through it. Yeah, taking my time doing it, but by applying a little bit of pressure and rocking the knife, in fact this knife, back and forth and wiggle it a little bit, I managed to make a pretty straight cut through that burn mark and therefore release the battery compartment, which is this. Okay, so it's really nothing but a slide on twist type of cap. Okay, so I disassembled practically the whole radio. What I'm going to concentrate on now is cleaning the chassis, as I said a few minutes ago, and then what I'll do is actually I'll power the radio up via a small variable power supply, and I'll hook up with some crocodile leads the original speaker and see whether the radio is live at all or not. If it isn't, then I need to start to debug it and see where the trouble might be. But as you can tell, the chassis is pretty dense. I mean, densely packed with parts. if I am going to have to change any parts on it, it's going to be really messy because it's so darn small. You know, can you imagine me working on a tiny little circuit like that? You know, I mean, okay, it's a challenge, but heck, it's really small. It's so tiny. I wonder who did manage to put it all together without breaking it, that is. My guess is it was a woman, because only a woman has such fine, tiny fingers that she can handle something this small. You know, and remember, this was assembled before, or let's say just about at the time when they invented integrated circuits. Okay, so I think this is about as small as they could make a transistor radio. Yeah, or at least a circuit. Interesting. Anyway, so the next step is to give the circuitry a basic cleaning and then test it by injecting some signals and a little bit of power and see whether it still functions or not. Okay, I hooked up the radio to my small power supply, variable power supply, and it's outputting about 4.5 volts, which would be the voltage you would get from 3 AA batteries in series, as you can see here in the battery holder. Okay, so the radio works, but it's incredibly faint. It should be much louder, and it isn't. It's really very weak. Tuning the radio is also quite hard, so I tried to tune it, and it's okay. I can tune it alright, but it's not very sensitive, and the volume is at maximum, so obviously there's something wrong with this radio. It should be a lot louder, and it should receive at least 3 or 4 stations, and right now I can only pick up maybe 1 or 2 stations, and then very faintly. So obviously there is something wrong with this radio. Now the very first thing I'm going to try is to replace, if I can, the electrolytics. Now there are 4 electrolytics in this little radio. I checked on the schematic. There is one 100 microfarad, one 220 microfarad, and there's one 10 microfarad, one 20 microfarad, and 2 100s. So my guess is the best thing would be, I cleaned all the contacts, so I'm reasonably certain that the contacts are clean, so that can't really be the problem why this radio is so faint. So I'm guessing that perhaps I should do best by replacing the electrolytics you see on the board. And you can see them all 4 if you look carefully. Okay, so one behind the other. Okay, but the problem is 2 of the electrolytics are behind this attachment extension, and to get at them, well, I sort of need to release the print board from its holder, and it sounds easy, but really it isn't. So what I'm going to do now is actually unscrew the volume potentiometer, which is really tiny, and then we'll see from there. Well, there we go. I unmounted it completely. So what I really needed to do was to unmount the potentiometer, which you see here, which is really tiny, because look at the size of the potentiometer next to my finger. It's really, really small. Now, okay, so I had to unmount the potentiometer, and there was also a sort of grounding wire, which you see here. Okay, so you see it right here, and that was soldered to this side of the PCB. Okay, so I needed to unsolder this wire as well. And then it was pretty straightforward sliding it out. You know, there are some rails on either side of the PCB area. Here you see it. So you see down there where my thumb is, that's a plastic rail, and the PCB slides right into it. And on the other side there's just the same kind of rail. Right there, you see the slot. Right, so I managed to slide the PCB out without too much trouble. So I guess what I'm going to do now is to gently and very carefully unsolder the electrolytics and replace them with good ones. Okay, so I need to find some good electrolytics now, and then we'll continue. Just to show you what I'm dealing with, so this is the circuit board seen through my magnifying glass. Okay, and deep down there, so if I take a pointer, so right here you see the two wires, so one here and one over there, that I need to solder. Now this is through the magnifying glass. Now look at it from a normal point of view. Okay, so it's really tiny, so I have to be damn careful not to solder any other wires or to burn anything or to break anything. In any case, I managed to unsolder this capacitor, which is a 100 microfarad 6.3 volts, and I'm going to replace it by this. This is a 100 microfarad, and let me see, I think it's 25 volts. So the capacitor is a bit over dimensioned, but that's okay. I can live with that. So well, let me solder those two wires first, and then we'll continue. Well, I replaced all the capacitors you see over there. Let me show you. So I replaced these capacitors with some new ones, and these capacitors are all of a no-name brand, I would tend to say. At least I can't see any kind of brand on them in any sort of way, unless this could be the brand, but I'm not sure. In any case, after replacing these capacitors, which you see lying over there, the radio is now plenty loud, but I can't receive a thing. no matter how much I turn the tuning capacitor, nothing changes. I just hear crackling. Okay. Also, and I must admit, I haven't paid it that much attention, but on the back side of the radio there's this little switch you see here. Okay, right here. So I'll take a pointer and show you. So this switch right here, okay, is not in the original design. Okay, so no matter how I turn the schematic upside down, the wrong way around, I can't find any switch. So it would seem that somebody in the past had made a modification to the radio. Now, as to the function of the modification, I really wouldn't know. My guess is it was a mod to make the radio switch between the AM and the long wave band, which would only require a few minor changes in capacitances and possibly even coils. In any case, somebody has messed with it, and I should have guessed really from the start when I saw it, because these little attachments of the switch really don't look factory to me now that I look at it. So yeah, somebody messed with this radio. And the thing is, of course, what did he or she mess with? And that, of course, is again the whole question. Now, in my opinion, what they certainly messed around with is the local oscillator circuitry, most probably, and they also added an extra variable capacitor, which you see here. Yeah, this is certainly not factory, this large variable capacitor down there. So yeah, somebody messed with the radio, and well, I guess what I need to do now is to have a close look at the schematic and then try to figure out what it was that they wanted to alter. Alright, I replaced all the capacitors, cleaned the whole PCB, cleaned a little bit the potentiometer and the tuning capacitor. So I thought, okay, so let's inject a high frequency signal and see what it does. Let's power it on. Well, there you go. I'm injecting now. Hang on. I'm injecting now, let's say, which I'm on band B. So let's say 800 kilohertz. Let's say we inject 800 kilohertz. Okay. Right. Okay, so let's inject 800 kilohertz. Modulated, of course. Here we go. Oh. Well, there you go. 800 kilohertz. Now, you'll remember there was this little switch here, yeah, which somebody built in. Now you might wonder what this is. Well, for your information, this little radio has an IF frequency of 468 kilohertz, normally speaking. So what would happen if I would inject a 468 kilohertz signal? Let's see. 468 would be somewhere around here somewhere. There you go. So at 468 kilohertz or thereabouts, the little radio does receive the injected IF frequency, okay, which I'm injecting via a little loop of wire. Okay, so now what is the switch you see here good for? Well, let's see. Okay, I put the switch in the other position. Now let's drop the injected frequency to 455. There you go. When I put this switch into that position, so in a right position or downwards as you see it now, it seems to have an IF frequency of 455 kilohertz. Now if I put this in the other position, well, we can still hear it very faintly, but then I need to push this up to 468. There you go. 468 kilohertz. So somebody modified this radio to work on both IF frequencies, so either on 468 kilohertz or 455 kilohertz. Why? Well, I don't rightly know. Maybe the person who owned this radio was a radio enthusiast like me and wanted to modify it so that he could use it as a little tool perhaps, or something like that. In any case, that is what happens when I throw over the switch in either position. Okay, so now let's see. Let's put the frequency all the way up to 900 kilohertz. Okay, here we go. Oh. There you go. So it does seem to receive a signal, although I doubt it's really well aligned, but it does receive a signal. Now the radio isn't really very sensitive, so it needs a pretty strong signal to receive anything. And as I told before, unfortunately where I live there are very few AM transmitters, which means that at best, if the weather is nice enough and it's very late in the evening, then I can manage to receive a few radio stations. But by day, as it is now, it's now 7:45. No way, I won't receive any radio stations. Well, at least not on a very insensitive little radio like this. So I guess the radio is more or less repaired. What I need to do now is to clean it up a bit more, clean up the cabinet, maybe even restore it a little bit, and we'll call this project done. Right, this is the whole inventory of parts, and all of it is cleaned, although not quite, well, let's say nice. There's still the damage here, for example, and also, you know, this looks brown, but originally it would have had a sort of a wood grain pattern. Now, I could have, with a paintbrush, I could have painted some sort of faux wood grain on the cabinet of the Sony, but I think I will hold off for a while and see whether I can find some valid alternative for painting a kind of faux wood grain on it. We'll see. Anyway, I also need to think a little bit about this button. Now, you can tell that the shine, yeah, or you could say the original lacquer layer, which protected the top of the button, has been damaged. Now, quite frankly, I do not know how I would repair this best. What would be the best method to repair the damaged, say, surface of the button, but my guess would be in the end to apply a layer of lacquer on top of it. Still, I'm holding off a bit because I don't want to damage the Sony logo you see here, and therefore I need to think a bit about what would be possibly the best method to restore this. Right, I also cleaned up the bezel which sits on top of the cabinet like this. Okay, so yeah, like this. So I repaired, or rather I cleaned the bezel, and it looks better. It certainly looks better, although there's unfortunately a quite deep scratch in it. And okay, it's not always visible, but there, you see, there's a scratch here where my thumb is. And well, I don't know how to take out that scratch without actually damaging the original finishing, which is a kind of a brushed look. Yeah, it's brushed aluminum. So I don't really know whether I really should take away that scratch or not. But possibly I won't. Anyway, this is the whole radio. Oh yeah, and I'll leave the switch as it is now, for now, even though the switch is not an original part of the radio. I will leave it because until I find a way to solve the problem of this damage nicely and applying a faux finish, well, I'm not going to mess with it too much because, well, really, for two reasons mainly. First of all, maybe it might be a useful feature in the future. Who knows? Secondly, because I really don't know what types of changes the previous owner has made to the circuitry. So, and since the PCB, as you can tell, is really densely packed, I mean completely packed with components, if I need to figure out what the previous owner has changed, well, I think I would do more damage than good. So I think I'm going to leave the switch for the moment as it is, and supposedly once I find a way to repair and or refinish the cabinet, I will, well, probably disconnect, or rather disassemble the button in such a way that I will cut through these little copper wires with which it is attached to the chassis, and then just carefully fold it back so that when I slide it back into the cabinet, the switch is hidden. Okay, well, what do I need to do now? Well, basically I need to reassemble the whole thing. Alright, I mounted back the volume button, or the on-off button. Yeah, so that's good, and I screwed it on tightly so that it doesn't move. And I did the same thing for the dial button, you see. So I screwed it back, and of course I tightened the how should I say, the tuning capacitor, which is connected via its rod to the tuning knob. I tightened down the tuning capacitor as well. So yeah, the next step is to fit the whole thing back inside the cabinet. Okay, and then what I'll need to do is to reattach the wires for the battery holder. Well, in the end I decided that I would close this hole up after all. I mean, it's not original, and well, the more I look at pictures of this type of radio, the more I feel that I should indeed make an effort to restore it. So what did I do? Well, I found a piece of plastic, a plastic cap, of which the plastic has about the same thickness as this. Yeah. Maybe the cap is a little bit thinner, but not by much. And it has around about the same consistency, the same hardness as this has. Okay, so, well, this is perhaps a bit stiffer, but not by much. And I just cut out a small sliver of it, which I cut to shape. Just like that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use super glue to stick this piece to the cylinder, and then afterwards with a nail file or something like that I will file it so that it comes to the exact same height everywhere with the original plastic. Okay, it's white, it's not brown, but really that is not really so important, because I bought myself some vinyl wrap which has about the same color and the same pattern as what used to be originally painted on this plastic. So in the end I will simply wrap the vinyl around the whole plastic body, and no one will see this repair. So I will probably try to darken it a little bit, perhaps with some brown paint or something like that. But really, I'm not going to go overboard. Anyway, what I'll do next is disconnect the little wires that keep this added switch in place, so that I can move the switch in an upward position, and in that sense make it fit into its original housing. I mean, make the whole radio fit. And well, once that is done, I need to just reconnect these wires, and basically we're done. Okay, I slid back the chassis into place and reattached it. So if you look on the inside, you can see a few new screws that I used, stainless steel screws. And now I'm in the process of reattaching the speaker and the battery holder to the radio by using these little wires here. So I'm waiting for my soldering iron to heat up, and once that's done, then I can screw the bottom cap on the middle cap here, and then I can fit both back into the, well, you could say the housing of the radio. And when that is done, I need to first attach the button, so, and then screw it tightly to the tuning capacitor's axle with this screw here, and only at the very last moment I need to reinsert the ring over it. Yeah, and the ring definitely goes on last. Okay, so, and anyway, I just need to clean it off a little bit better. But well, there you go. The little window to protect the dial knob is back on. I used cyanocrylate glue, you know, instant glue or super glue like some people call it, and it will never detach again, so that's a good thing. I actually used a little bit of super glue to repair this as well, and it seems to hold perfectly. It feels a little bit rough, but really not much. So what I might do once the bottom cap is reinstalled is to go over it with some very fine grit, very fine grit sanding paper. Yeah, or maybe even a nail file. I don't know yet, but just to make it absolutely flat so that I won't feel any kind of ridges. Because you see, once you start using adhesive vinyl film to cover it, there should be really no protuberances on the whole housing, because the slightest irregularity in the plastic surface will come through the vinyl, yeah, will show through the vinyl, and you should avoid that if you can at all. Okay, so let me get on with soldering back those little wires, and well, we're almost there. All right, I'm almost done. The whole radio is assembled except for one detail. We need to put back the bezel on top of the radio. Now, you only get one chance at doing this right, so what you do is you orient the ring into the right position like this, and notice that inner ring that is cut out of the aluminum ring. Yeah, you see here this edge. Well, this edge needs to grip these hooks here, these plastic hooks, and there are 3 like those all around. So if you look at it from this angle, you'll see that the plastic hook reaches just about up to this edge here, the lower edge of that cut. So you need to place it that way, up over the button like this, and then this little window here should fall exactly into place with this little cutout here. So let's see, this is about the right position, and now you gently but firmly push like that. Voila! And there you go. It's back in place. Nice, huh? So that's about it. Now unfortunately I don't have vinyl wrap yet, so I'll only be able to show you the absolute final result once I have the vinyl wrap. Right, I installed into the radio 3 AA batteries like this one, okay, and I propose to show you the radio while it functions. Now mind you, it's still day, and it's actually late afternoon, and in only late at night are AM transmitters really powerful enough to be received well where I live. So we might have reception, but it will be probably a bit on the weak side. Still, we can have a go and see whether we can receive anything, and if we can, how many. Okay, that must be either an English or an Irish radio station, so let's go on. That's pretty weak. Okay, so let's go on. Okay, so this is an English radio station as well. This is a French radio station. This must be some kind of a beacon or something like that. Although, let me see. Oh no, it's my video camera. Imagine that. Ha! Weird. Okay, the volume is at maximum, by the way, but, well, as you can tell, the radio stations are so weak that even at maximum volume, you can barely hear them. Okay, so, but the situation is improved at night, okay, for at least for AM stations. Ah, okay, it's a song from Blondie I hear in the background. Okay, well, in any case, the radio does work, but it's not very sensitive. And like I said, the radio stations are pretty weak in the area where I live. Anyway, so this is a final look at it from all sides. So the bottom. Okay. And then the repaired hole you see here. Okay, which eventually will be covered with vinyl wrap once I have it. And well, aside from the vinyl wrapping I need to do, and perhaps even retouching the top logo, the radio is pretty much ready for use. So, well, that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this restoration of a Sony TR-1829 transistor radio from 1969, if I'm not mistaken.